Fala galera, beleza? Tô voltando aqui com mais um vídeo. E rapaziada, nesse vídeo a gente vai assistir um vídeo de um gringo aqui. Ele tá falando sobre a nova Unreal Engine 5.2. E veio várias coisas aí pra implementar e pra melhorar o estilo da criação de jogos. Então vamos assistir aqui, o vídeo tem 10 minutos. Provavelmente a gente não vai assistir o vídeo todo. Vou deixar o vídeo rolar aqui, eu só vou pausar aqui pra gente falar sobre alguns assuntos, beleza?
To create complex models and environments. It is artist-friendly programming that lets you define rules which perform specific actions. Procedural tools are common in a lot of 3D programs. Substance Designer allows the user to generate materials procedurally without any textures. And Blender has geometry nodes, a powerful node-based editor to create complex animations and models quickly. Procedural tools are essential if you have any repetitive tasks. When Epic Games made the Matrix City demo, they generated it procedurally. Since the city is made up of millions of unique objects, it isn't practical to hand place every single asset. Instead, they set rules to determine which streets to include, where buildings should appear, and the size of those buildings.
Isso aí é uma parada muito interessante. Parece que a gente vai demarcar o território, dizer o que a gente quer, o que a gente quer nesse território. E a própria inteligência artificial da Unreal Engine 5.2 vai fazer isso aí pra gente, vai criar isso aí pra gente. Aparentemente é isso.
What would take months for an artist to create can now take seconds to generate. And they can pick from an infinite amount of randomized cities. In order to generate the city, they had to
criou
use a program
praticamente a cidade toda.
Houdini is a powerful software that is used in most movies and games. But if you ever use Houdini, then you know it is really complicated. If you wanted to create your own procedural tools for Unreal Engine, you had to use Houdini. Until now, procedural content generation, or PCG for short, brings the power of procedural tools into the engine. We don't have to use another program. We can do all our work directly in VIRE.
Diminuir a área,
For example, let's create
vai
a
automaticamente
on the right is a PCG graph.
já altera,
So
né?
we first have to add points to the landscape. Use a surface sampler in order to preview.
Ele tá fazendo uma landscape, né?
Now I think there's a little bit too many points. So what I'll do is drag from out and use a density filter to remove the points. I can increase the lower bound, which will slowly start to get rid of points. To add random rotation and scale, use a transform points node. Absolute rotation, so the trees are always facing up. Set a max rotation of 360, so each point faces a different direction. And for the scale, be a random range from 0.8 to 1.2. Finally, to spawn static meshes, use a static mesh spawner and spawn two meshes. One will be a tree and the other one will be a different tree. I'm able to move it around and those trees will automatically generate randomly for me. And if I want
as árvores vão se adequando ao terreno, né?
Within the surface
Uma parada interessante.
Unbounded. Just like that, we can create a massive forest quickly using the power of procedural tools.
Queria tipo uma sequência e ele botou na landscape dele todinha. Sequência.
As complicated as you want. This graph right here creates an oasis. Let's say you were creating a desert environment and you want to add an oasis. Well, all I have to do is drag in the oasis PCG and it is automatically created for us. I didn't have to hand place every asset. Thanks to the rules I set up, it spawns instantly. I can even move it around and it will generate a new oasis each time on top of the landscape. Or I can make this a really long oasis.
É isso que eu falei. Ele sabe a sequência, você demarca a área e ele já preenche com o que você selecionou lá. Você seleciona árvore, pedras, flores, plantas e ele vai preenchendo do jeito que você selecionou. Isso aí é massa demais. Fazer florestas, fazer a cidade, fazer lixo no chão, isso é muito maneiro. Aí ele seleciona a quantidade de coisas, né? Botou 0.5, 0.8. Vai aumentar, claro. Fica bastante. Muito maneiro.
So I can also use splines to control the shape of PCGs. Let's say if I want a round
não precisa simplesmente ser quadrado, né? A gente seleciona a área. Muito maneiro.
I'm able to get the exact shape of the oasis that I want. Splines are not just for creating shapes. I made one that will cut a path through the PCG, removing rocks and trees. So if I just drag it out right there, grab one of the edges and drag this out, you'll see that I'm
Ele vai criar um caminho de pedra Olha que maneiro.
Maybe travelers always go through this path.
É um caminho de pedra no meio da mata.
They can also interact with the environment.
Caraca, ele criou um rio.
Grow from the water, so the PCG knows where the water is and does not add trees there. We're not just limited to natural environments. You can generate pretty much anything, even completely new 3D models. And in a demo released by Epic, they generated this
Muito
entire
maneiro,
world.
muito maneiro.
Really, the possibilities are endless. Also, unlike Houdini, procedural content generation runs in real time. That means you can have gameplay elements affected. For example, the player can press a button and the whole world changes.
Caraca, o que ele mostrou aqui agora, isso que ele mostrou aqui agora, dá pra gente fazer, não sei se ele falou isso porque eu não entendo inglês, dá pra gente montar uma customização de outono, inverno, verão dentro do nosso jogo. E, caraca, é em tempo real ali, o personagem andando ele já vai mudando. Bagulho massa. Muito massa. A iluminação, né, provavelmente tá melhor do que a 5.1 e a 5 normal. Isso aí é muito maneiro. Olha o nível de detalhe da areia em si, da poeira, né, no objeto. Olha o nível de detalhe que tá preenchendo o objeto. Isso é muito maneiro. The only problem is that we have to use lerp nodes to combine them, and lerp nodes do not take into account which layer is on top or their thickness, which can lead to unnatural materials. Substrate changes this. It allows us to combine materials on top of each other and to set a layer's thickness. This means each of these materials are calculating their own reflection. Here's that material combining metal and dirt in 5.1, and here's a similar one in 5.2. 5.2 material looks a lot better. With substrate, glass is now easier to render, and we can combine two materials in unique ways, like with this orange material on the bottom and blue on top. A material like this was impossible before substrate. You can create advanced materials like oil, which Epic Games showed. It is combining 4 different layers, which are all realistically interacting with each other. Notice how there are multiple layers of reflection. É tipo uma pintura refletiva, né? Diamantada. A iluminação agora, which gave us high performance dynamic bounce lighting. It also introduced a new shadow rendering system called virtual shadow maps. Virtual shadow maps allow for soft shadows and shadows at far distances. This was impossible using Unreal Engine 4's cascaded shadow maps, which would disappear at far distances. And while virtual shadow maps are great, they are not as accurate as ray trace shadows. Negócio nem jogo mais parece, né? Parece tipo uma cena de filme. É tão surreal que a parada tá. In 5.2, ray trace shadows got a major upgrade. Now they're a lot more accurate and can cast smaller shadows. It is most noticeable on area light. Aí é 5.1 e a 5.2. Deu uma melhorada maneira aí.
Lighting include more accurate reflections and meta-human occlusion, which was improved on thin surfaces and hair, which was before 5.2. Another big addition to UE5 is the ability to create your own custom tools with scriptable tools. In Unreal, under modes, we have all these useful tools. For example, modeling mode gives me access to tools to edit and create models. The only problem is, if we want to create our own tool, we would have to code it in C++, which is really complicated. Scriptable tools changes this. It allows us to create custom tools without a single line of code and blueprints. And while it does look complicated, it is a lot easier than coding it. For example of why this is useful, a common workflow, especially when placing natural objects, is I drag out the mesh, I then rotate it randomly so it doesn't face the same direction as other meshes, and then I scale it. I create a tool that automates most of that process.
Parada surreal, né? Parece que quem olha assim não fala que isso aí é um... Não fala que isso é um mapeamento, fala que isso aí foi uma foto tirada de algum lugar. Surreal.
Hold down the left mouse button and then drag to then increase or decrease its size. So very quickly, I'm able to add different size rocks in my world. And I can even add a random rotation in the settings. So now this rock has a random rotation each time I set it. I also added the option to place a random mesh from a list. So if we just select that, now it's going to pick a random mesh to spawn each time. I work a lot faster with this tool, and in the future I can create more tools to speed up my workflow. Scriptable tools can also interact with procedural content generation and geometry script, which means we can pretty much create any custom tool. Speaking of tools, for most of the modeling mode tools, we now get this little widget in the bottom left hand corner, which allows us to input accurate changes. For example, if I bring this up and I want this to be exactly 300 meters, then I can type in 300 right here. Before this tool, we had to guess. Now we know exactly what we were doing. Those were all the major changes of UE 5.2. These are just the one.
Então é isso aí, rapaziada. Eu vou tá deixando o link do canal dessa Unreal Sense aqui aí na descrição. E se vocês querem ver algum vídeo da Unreal Engine 5.2 aqui, eu baixo e a gente tenta fazer um projetinho, tenta fazer alguma coisa aí. Se vocês quiserem, é só deixar na descrição aí. Provavelmente vai ser mais pesada, né, de que a Unreal Engine 5. Essa 5.2 aí, mas também promete ser um bagulho muito mais, tá ligado? Um bagulho muito mais foda. Mas então é isso aí, rapaziada. Se vocês gostaram do vídeo, deixa o like, valeu e fui.